I'm here at Gibbs Ranch on the campus of Sam Houston State University and going to look at and talk about some of the cover crops that we planted this last October. It is now the end of March, close to the 1st of April, and this is cereal rye. The variety that we planted was Elbon, and it does really well in this soil. It's sort of a clay loam type soil. And cereal rye is taller than I am. It's the tallest of all the small grains. It's excellent quality forage when it's in the vegetative stage. Obviously right now it is, some of it's in anthesis where it's flowering as you see here, but others have already flowered and it's in the early stages of grain formation. You can see it has an elongated spike type inflorescence with fairly long awns, the long pointed objects there. What we will do next with this rye, once it gets just a little more mature, is that we will roll it down with a cultipacker or a roller chopper, lay it down flat on the ground, and plant with a no-till drill a variety of other crops, including corn, sorghum, pearl millet, and cowpea. And we'll see how well those crops will emerge through this mat of vegetative material we leave behind. In this plot we planted cereal rye, which you see there, along with some Austrian winter pea. And as a weakly tendrilled plant, you can see that the Austrian winter pea is actually climbing up the cereal rye. And people used to do this all the time, plant these mixtures together and make a lot of hay or silage out of this blend like this. Again, it's a springtime crop, combination of crops, and getting it to dry for hay production is our biggest challenge. This crop is Austrian winter pea, and winter pea does well on soils that have a high level of fertility, near neutral pH, and good water holding capacity, which is typical of this particular site. I don't think I would plant much of it on a deep sandy type soil, but it's productive. Unfortunately, this past winter we've had some issues with it. If you look over here, you'll see an area where it's died, and that happened about a month and a half, 2 months ago, and I believe it's due to a soil organism called Phytophthora, sometimes called water mold. It's a fungus-like organism that lives in the soil for long times. Anywhere cotton has been planted, Phytophthora is probably in the soil. In fact, it goes by the common name of cotton root rot, and it will cause root rot for a variety of different species of plants, including Austrian winter pea. Another look at Austrian winter pea with some areas that died earlier, kind of fallen over and filled in some gaps, but there's a lot of dead plants in there. Another very excellent cover crop as well as forage crop, high quality, high crude protein forage, is a legume called hairy vetch. Hairy vetch grows pretty quickly after planting. It didn't grow as fast this year or as abundantly as it did last year, probably because we had a fairly cold fall and a dry winter, but it came on strong during the spring and it's producing a lot of biomass now. Another excellent forage crop and cover crop is berseem clover. This is berseem and it's just now starting to flower. Here's a bloom over here. You can see the bloom on berseem clover. It's white We have a lot of white flowered legumes. But if you look at the leaves, you see that they're nothing like white clover, or ball clover for that matter. Long strap-shaped leaves, elongated. Interestingly, you see here some of the purple coloration. This is anthocyanin pigments that apparently berseem clover has quite a bit of. So when it undergoes a little bit of stress, it starts showing those anthocyanin pigments. I think the stress here is that it's been in the 90s for the last few days. Heat stress. Nonetheless, it produces a lot of biomass, and this is it's a little bit over my knees in height. This happens to be frosty berseem clover, but I've planted Bigby berseem before, and it does well as also. But berseem wants a soil that's got a lot of water holding capacity, and this clay loam on this site fits it very well. This is probably our best plot of berseem clover out of all of our research plots. Outstanding density. At first I didn't think it was going to do well because we had such a dry fall. But we got some rain in the winter, early spring, and it really came on strong. One of the legumes that grows prolifically at Gibbs Ranch is ball clover, and it volunteers quite well. This is a volunteer ball clover patch. Little white flowers, resembles white clover, kind of turns a little pink when it's flowering, so that's a little different. The cluster of flowers is a little smaller than white clover, and most of the leaves do not have the watermark. However, every once in a while you see some that do, as you see these here, but most of them don't. Here's a patch of ball clover, volunteer. You can see the bee working on it. Ball clover has a white flower also, but its leaves are different than white clover, and they're different from berseem clover. So you can tell just by looking at the leaves which legume you have, or at least distinguish them partly. I see a little bit of Persian clover, that little pink flower down in there, but I'll show you more of that later. This is a beautiful little patch of ball clover, all volunteer. We planted 50 acres of ball clover about 20 years ago, and it has now spread to over 1,000 acres of Gibbs Ranch by the animals, eating the seeds and replanting those seeds in another pasture as they got moved around. What's interesting about ball clover is it has a tremendous amount of genetic diversity within a population. You can see that some of these have a pinkish tinted flower and others don't. That's just the genetic diversity. Sometimes the leaves have some strange markings on them, and other times there are no markings. So what I like about ball clover though is you see that honeybee working right there. This is one of the best clover crops that I know of. We produce a lot of honey crops, I'm sorry. We produce a lot of honey from the ball clovers. And ball clover will continue to bloom as long as it rains all the way up into the month of June. That's what I really like about it. So we got a long season of producing nectar for honey production. It's interesting, it grows a lot of biomass. This right here is about knee high. Lots of biomass. The animals might bloat on it a little bit if they were turned into it fresh, but if they've been grazing it all winter, not too bad of a problem. By the way, it doesn't really produce much in the the fall of the year. It's really a springtime producer in early summer. This is what remains of our daikon radish. We had a really good stand of daikon radish in here, but it's all maturing now, going to seed, as you can see here, seed pods on it. There's a lady beetle, probably going after some aphids, if it can find them. I see a few aphids on there as well. In fact, I see some other lady beetles. So those are good predatory insects, help reduce the aphid population. Unfortunately, the aphids usually overwhelm the ladybugs and they can't keep up with them. Interesting looking seed pods though on these. But here's what's really interesting about daikon radish. Of course, it's a root crop, and some promote it for its very long root. You can see that probably about 5, 6, 7 inches of that were in the ground. Of course, if we leave this here, if we leave it like all the rest of this in here, it's going to rot. That radish root is going to rot, and it's going to leave a big open hole in the ground. It's a good way for water and air to get into the soil. So it's a beneficial plant, but you have a hard time getting it to grow, getting it up like this, unless you till the land first. Some people say you can throw it out on a pasture and just let that seed come up, but in my experience that does not work very well. Very few of those seeds survive unless they have bare ground or a well prepared seed bed. But a good conservation crop. We'd probably come in here and just mow this down, and we could use a no-till drill and plant something directly into it. Here's another late blooming daikon radish plant. So at least you get an opportunity to see what the flowers look like. And I'll get down here a little closer and you can see what the leaves look like. You could graze daikon radish or any of the brassicas or other brassicas. They're not very high in fiber content, so they tend to run through the animal. They have a high rate of passage, and they're hard to keep in persistence once you start grazing them. But for short-term grazing, high volume, these are pretty good. This is a strip of almost all annual ryegrass. All volunteered. We didn't plant this. This field has been planted to ryegrass many times in the past, but this seed was already in the ground. And if we had not planted these other cover crops that you see around, this whole field would have been in volunteer ryegrass. So if you want to suppress something like this volunteer ryegrass, then it's important to plant a different species before it germinates and gets established, because once it does, it's very aggressive. So this ryegrass is up to my waist. It's mature, getting mature. Many producers will actually harvest it at this stage because it's got a lot of biomass, but I will tell you the quality is declining quite rapidly on it because it is losing leaf tissue and putting its energy into seed production. But still would make a filler, a good filler, and maybe even a decent hay at this stage. But usually the time of the year when it would be ideal for us to harvest ryegrass for hay, it's rainy, it's cool. We can't get the material to dry down fast enough. So if you get lucky and catch a little window in there where the weather is just right, you might get a very good harvest of ryegrass. If this had been cut, say 2 weeks ago, probably would have had crude protein levels in the 10 to 11%, 12% range, depending on the level of fertilization with nitrogen. Oh, and there's a little bit of rescue grass in with it. You can see the difference between rescue grass and ryegrass right there. Inflorescence totally different. People get them confused all the time. I'd much rather have ryegrass than I had rescue grass. Both of them, when they're in the vegetative stage, are very good quality forage. I just wanted you to see what it looks like outside of our plot area. You see all those little yellow flowers. That's the same land. It's just that that land was not worked. It's been compacted over time by heavy grazing pressure, and nothing was planted on it this past fall. So it had some volunteer plants that came up, and that happens to be a plant called buttercup. And we have one of those, or a little patch of it, right here in our plot area, so you can see what buttercup looks like. Buttercup lacks a lot of water, and this soil holds a lot of water. Buttercup has 5 petals. They're very shiny, glossy. Looked almost like they're wet, but they're not. See if I can focus in on that one. Okay, so there's buttercup. It's an attractive little flower. Unfortunately, animals really don't like to graze on the buttercup plant. Ranunculus is the genus, and they have some chemical compounds that are apparently distasteful, and some even say they're poisonous. Fortunately, most animals just avoid them, and you don't have to worry about the fact that there may be something toxic in them. So I'm outside of the fenced area, still in this clay loam type soil, and I'm just going to pan around, and you can see the abundance of buttercup. There haven't been any animals in here in about a month, so all of this is just rebounded since the animals were removed. In the foreground here you can see a nice patch of ball clover mixed in with a little Persian clover. You see those pink flowers in there scattered throughout. And I'll just pan around, and you can see that this land is capable of producing a lot, but we have to rotationally graze stuff in here, and then periodically the land needs to be chiseled, because the animals, when they're allowed to graze when it's in a wet condition, they really compact the soil in here, making it tough for stuff to grow. This ball clover in other parts of the ranch that's not so compacted is quite a bit taller than what you see right here. And there's our high fence area and the research plots in the background. Well, that's just an overview of some of the crops that can be used for both cover crops as well as forage crops. This is a project that Dr. Sham Nair and I have going with the USDA cooperation and funding. So it's a 3-year project, and we'll be continuing this work next year as well, and perhaps even into the following year. So hope you got something useful from it, and I hope you're staying safe and staying well. So long.